Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the dusty boots of a pioneer on the Oregon Trail, where the promise of fertile land and a fresh start pulls you west like a magnet. Picture yourself in 1843 standing in Independence, Missouri, surrounded by creaking wagons, nervous livestock and folks buzzing with equal parts hope and dread. The air smells of damp earth and fresh-cut wood, with a faint whiff of manure from the oxen nearby. You're about to haul your life's possessions 2,170 miles across plains, rivers and mountains, chasing a dream of Oregon's lush valleys. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this without some serious grit, or at least a good pair of socks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Independence, the jumping off point for the Oregon Trail, and the town's a chaotic swirl of last-minute deals and nervous goodbyes. It's spring, the ideal time to start because leaving too early means muddy trails, and too late risks snow in the mountains. Historically, about 400,000 people made this trek between the 1830s and 1860s, driven by land grants and tales of Oregon's Eden-like fields. You're one of them, standing by your wagon, heart pounding as you double-check your supplies. You've got a canvas-covered wagon, maybe 10 feet long, packed with flour, bacon and coffee, but it's already creaking under the weight. You're allowed about 2,000 pounds, but every extra pound risks breaking an axle in the middle of nowhere. You're eyeing that fancy cast-iron stove your neighbour insisted on bringing, and you're already betting it'll be dumped by Nebraska. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pioneers packed anti-fogmatic whiskey, claiming it cured everything from colds to bad moods. Spoiler, it didn't. You're not alone in this madness. Families, single men, and even a few women travelling solo crowd the staging grounds. You overhear a preacher promising divine protection, while a grizzled trader warns of rivers that swallow wagons whole. Historians still argue whether the trail was more a bold adventure or a desperate gamble for most travellers. Optimists saw opportunity, but realists knew the odds were grim. You pick a wagon train, maybe 20 to 100 wagons, led by a guide who claims he's done this before. Trust is shaky, but you've got no choice. You're assigned a role. Maybe you're herding the spare oxen or scouting for water. Everyone's got to pull their weight or the group votes you out. Harsh, but that's trail democracy. The first big decision hits you fast. Which route to take? The main trail heads northwest, but some folks are whispering about shortcuts like the Sublet Cutoff, which skips a loop but risks waterless stretches. You stick with the main path for now, because you've heard stories of shortcuts stranding folks in deserts. Your oxen, slow but sturdy, plod forward at about 2 miles an hour. You're walking beside them, not riding, because the wagon's too full, and you need to save the animal's strength. The trail's already rutted from earlier wagons and you're dodging rocks and roots. Kids are running alongside, excited for now, but give it a week, they'll be whining. You're feeling the weight of leaving everything behind. Back east, you had a small farm, maybe a shop, but hard times or wanderlust pushed you here. You're carrying a letter from your sister, promising to visit once you're settled, but the distance feels like another planet. The trail's first gift is a reality check. This isn't a romantic adventure. Dust coats your throat and your boots are already rubbing blisters. You pass a discarded rocking chair, someone's dream of home now littering the path. It's a grim reminder. Every step west means shedding weight, both literal and emotional. You crack a joke to your wagon mate about starting a roadside furniture shop, but the laugh's half-hearted. By day's end, you're exhausted, and it's only the beginning. You camp in a rough circle with the other wagons, a trick to corral the livestock and fend off any trouble. The stars are brighter than you've ever seen, but sleep's hard to come by with the ground digging into your back. You're wondering if you've made a terrible mistake, but there's no turning back now. Tomorrow you'll face the trail again, one muddy step at a time. You're standing in the dusty chaos of Independence, Missouri, your wagon half packed and your nerves fraying like an old rope. The Oregon Trail stretches ahead, but before you can take a single step west, you've got to wrestle with the puzzle of what to cram into your creaking, canvas-covered wagon. It's not like you're packing for a weekend camping trip. Every choice could mean survival or disaster. You're juggling flour sacks, bacon slabs, and a few precious tools, all while the oxen snort impatiently nearby. The sun's beating down and you're already sweating through your shirt, wondering if you've overpacked or, worse, forgotten something critical. The wagon's your lifeline, a rickety wooden box about 10 feet long and 4 feet wide, built to carry roughly 2,000 pounds. Historically, pioneers loaded up with staples: 200 pounds of flour per person, 75 pounds of bacon, 10 pounds of coffee, and maybe some dried fruit if you were feeling fancy. You're doing mental math, trying to balance food against tools, clothes, and maybe a family heirloom or two. That chipped china teapot your mother swore by? It's tempting, but it's dead weight. You've heard stories of trailside graves marked by abandoned pianos and dressers, folks who learned the hard way that sentimentality doesn't survive ruts and rivers. You toss a glance at your neighbour, who's stubbornly hauling a massive oak table. Good luck with that, you mutter, half joking, picturing it ditched in a ditch by week 2. You're not just packing for yourself. If you've got a family, every kid, spouse or cousin needs their share of provisions, and the wagon's groaning under the strain. You've got to fit bedding, a tent, a rifle for hunting, and a repair kit for when, not if, the wheels snap. A quirky tidbit floats around the wagon train. Some folks packed portable soup, a weird glue-like broth you boil down and carry like jerky. Sounds gross, but it's lightweight and supposedly keeps you alive. You stick to beans and bacon, though, because you're not that desperate yet. The bigger headache is the livestock. You've got oxen, maybe 6 or 8, because they're tougher than mules and cheaper than horses. Each one needs to be fed, watered, and kept from wandering off. You're already practicing your ox driving skills, yelling G for right and haw for left, feeling like a fool when they ignore you. Historians still argue whether oxen were the best choice or just the cheapest. Mules were faster, but oxen could survive on sparse grass. You're sticking with oxen, mostly because your budget's tighter than a new boot. You're also hauling a few chickens in a crate. They're clucking a constant reminder that fresh eggs might be your only luxury. The town's a frenzy of last-minute deals. Merchants hawk overpriced barrels and guaranteed waterproof canvas, while conmen try to sell you maps to non-existent shortcuts. You barter for a spare axle, knowing a broken one could strand you for days. You're also eyeing the other families in your wagon train, sizing them up. There's the preacher who's all fire and brimstone, the widower with 3 kids who never stop bickering, and a young couple who look like they've never seen a shovel. You're all in this together, but trust is thin. If someone's wagon breaks down, will you stop to help, or keep moving to save your own supplies? Every decision feels like a gamble. Pack too much and you'll kill your oxen or snap an axle. Pack too little, and you'll starve before you hit Fort Laramie. You're double-checking your water barrels, because the next reliable stream might be days away. You've heard whispers of cholera outbreaks, bad water being the culprit, so you're paranoid about every drop. You crack a joke to your wagon mate about bottling Missouri River water and selling it as Pioneer Elixir, but the laugh's weak. Water's no joke out here. As you lash down the last sack of flour, you feel the weight of what's at stake. Back east you left a failing farm or a crowded city, chasing Oregon's promise of 640 free acres. But the trail doesn't care about your dreams. You're already noticing the first discards along the road. Broken chairs, a cracked mirror, left by folks who packed their hopes instead of their common sense. You take a deep breath, dust stinging your eyes, and climb onto the wagon seat. Tomorrow you'll start walking, because riding's a luxury you can't afford. The trail's waiting and it's not patient. You're finally moving, your boots sinking into the soft springtime mud of the Oregon Trail as you leave Independence behind. The wagon train creaks forward, a long line of white canvas tops swaying like sails on a landlocked sea. Your oxen plod at a maddeningly slow 2 miles an hour, their hooves churning the earth into a sticky mess. The air's thick with the scent of damp grass and sweat, both human and animal. It's 1843, and you're part of a wave of pioneers. Historically, some 10,000 crossed the trail that year alone, chasing Oregon's promise of free land. But right now, the romance of adventure feels like a cruel joke, as rain drizzles down your neck and your boots squelch with every step. The trail's barely a path, more a suggestion of ruts carved by earlier wagons. You're walking beside your team, coaxing the oxen with a stick and a weary haw to keep them straight. Riding's not an option. Your wagon's packed tight, and the oxen need to save their strength. The first few days are a brutal initiation. Spring rains turn the ground to sludge, and you're constantly yanking the wheels free from mud that grips like quicksand. You're already cursing the neighbour who swore this was the easy part. A quirky tidbit you overhear. Some pioneers smeared bear grease on their wagon wheels to keep them spinning smoother. You're sceptical, but you're also eyeing your axles. wondering if it's worth a try. The landscape's a mix of rolling hills and open prairie, with wildflowers poking through the grass. It's pretty, sure, but the beauty's overshadowed by the ache in your legs and the constant worry about what's next. You're crossing small creeks now, nothing too deep, but every ripple in the water makes you nervous. You've heard stories of wagons tipping, supplies ruined, or worse, folks drowned trying to ford a stream that looked harmless. Historians still argue whether early trail guides exaggerated the dangers to sell their services, or if the risks were just that unpredictable. Either way, you're not taking chances. You double-check the ropes securing your barrels, praying they'll stay dry. Your wagon train's a fragile alliance, maybe 30 wagons strong, and everyone's learning the rhythm. You circle up at night, wagons forming a corral to keep the livestock safe. The kids are still excited, chasing each other through the grass, but you're already seeing the strain on the adults' faces. There's the widower with his 3 kids, one of whom keeps sneaking off to explore, and the preacher who's taken to sermonizing every evening, whether you like it or not. You're assigned to night watch tonight, which means staying up to listen for wolves or worse. You crack a joke about charging the coyotes for a front row seat to your campfire, but your wagon mate just grumbles. The weather's your biggest foe right now. One minute it's sunny, the next a cold rain soaking through your hat. You're wearing the same wool shirt and trousers you started with, and they're starting to smell like a wet dog. Laundry's a luxury you can't afford yet. Water's for drinking, not washing. You're learning to ration everything. Water, patience, even hope. The trail's teaching you fast that every step west is a test. You pass a broken wheel abandoned in the grass, a grim reminder of someone's bad day. It's only been a week, and you're already wondering if that teapot you left behind was worth the space. By day's end, you're bone-tired, your feet throbbing as you slump by the campfire. Cooking's a chore, beans and bacon again. Boiled over a fire you're too exhausted to tend properly. You're starting to understand why folks talk about the trail like it's a living thing, always waiting to trip you up. The stars overhead are stunning, but they don't ease the knot in your stomach. Tomorrow's another day of mud, ruts, and the slow grind west. You pull your blanket tighter, trying to ignore the damp chill, and hope the weather clears before the real rivers come into view. You're sprawled by a flickering campfire, the night air sharp with the scent of burning cedar and the faint musk of oxen sleeping nearby. The Oregon Trail's been grinding you down for weeks now, and these evening pauses are your only reprieve. Your wagon train's circled up on the open prairie, wagons forming a rickety fortress against whatever lurks in the dark. Wolves, thieves, or just your own nagging fears. The stars above are a dazzling spread, brighter than anything back east, but you're too tired to care much. Your back aches from walking all day, and your hands are raw from wrestling the oxen. Historically, these nightly camps were where pioneers bonded, or bickered, over shared hardships, forming tight-knit groups that could make or break the journey. You're learning that lesson fast. The fire's warmth is a small mercy, but it's not enough to shake the chill in your bones. You're sipping weak coffee, brewed from beans you're already rationing, and chewing on hardtack that's about as tasty as a shingle. Someone's passing around a fiddle, scratching out a tune that's more enthusiasm than skill. You join in the chatter, swapping stories about home or rumours about the trail ahead. There's a quirky tidbit making the rounds. Some folks swear rubbing onions on your feet keeps the mosquitoes away. You're sceptical, but with the bugs buzzing like a choir, you're tempted to try it. You crack a joke about smelling like a soup kitchen, and a few folks chuckle, though the preacher glares like you've sinned. The campfire's where the wagon train feels like a community for better or worse. You're hearing about the widower's youngest kid who keeps sneaking off to hunt fireflies, and the young couple who argue louder than the coyotes. There's tension too. Someone's accused of slacking on night watch, and whispers of mistrust are spreading. Historians still argue whether wagon trains were more cooperative or cutthroat. Some groups shared everything, while others split over petty grudges. You're trying to stay neutral, but it's hard when you're all crammed together smelling each other's unwashed clothes and hearing every snore. Night watch is the real kicker. You're up for a shift, trudging the perimeter with a rifle you barely know how to use. The darkness is thick, broken only by the fire's glow and the occasional snort from the livestock. You're listening for rustling grass, wondering if it's a fox or something worse. Stories of raids float through your mind, though most trouble so far has been from nature, not people. You're starting to understand the trail's rhythm. Walk all day, camp all night, repeat until you're too numb to care. The kids are finally asleep, wrapped in blankets under the wagons, but you're envying their innocence. They don't yet grasp how far Oregon still is. The fire's dying down now, and you're banking the coals to keep it going till morning. Cooking's a group effort, but it's no feast. Beans, bacon, and maybe a biscuit if you're lucky. You're already dreaming of fresh bread, a luxury you left behind in Missouri. You glance at the wagon, remembering that bear grease you didn't smear on the wheels. Maybe tomorrow, if you can stomach the smell. You crack another joke about opening a trailside bakery, but your wagon mate just groans, too tired for humour. The truth is, you're all starting to feel the weight of the journey, and it's only been a month. As you settle onto your bedroll, the ground feels harder than ever, like it's personally offended by your presence. The campfire's embers glow faintly, and you're staring at the sky, wondering if you'll ever see Oregon's green valleys. The trail's already taught you to savour these quiet moments, but they're fleeting. Tomorrow, you'll be back to mud, ruts, and the endless plod west. You pull your hat over your eyes, trying to block out the world and hope sleep comes before the next watch shift does. You're staring at the churning waters of the Kansas River, its muddy current swirling like a bad omen under the grey spring sky. Your wagon train's halted, oxen snorting nervously as you all gather to size up this first major crossing on the Oregon Trail. The river's swollen from recent rains, and the far bank looks a lifetime away. You're clutching the reins, your boots sinking into the soggy shore, while the wind carries a damp chill that seeps through your worn-out coat. Historically, river crossings were some of the deadliest moments on the trail. Thousands of pioneers lost wagons, livestock, or lives to misjudged fords or rickety ferries. You're not thrilled about testing your luck here. The group's buzzing with debate. Ford the river or pay for the ferry. Fording's free but risky. Your wagon could tip, your supplies could soak, or an ox could slip and drown. The ferry, run by a grizzled local who looks like he's seen too many winters, costs a small fortune. Maybe $1 or $2, which feels like robbery when you're pinching every penny. You're leaning toward fording, mostly because your funds are thinner than your patience. A quirky tidbit floats among the group. Some pioneers sealed their wagons with pine tar to make them watertight, turning them into makeshift boats. You're tempted, but your wagon's canvas is already leaking like a bad roof, so you stick to ropes and prayers. The crossing's a logistical nightmare. You're helping lash barrels tighter, double-checking the oxen's yokes, and praying the kids stay out of the way. The widower's youngest is tossing pebbles into the water, oblivious to the stakes while the preacher's muttering about divine guidance. You're not sure if it's faith or desperation, but you're hoping for both. Historians still argue whether most crossing deaths were due to bad planning or plain bad luck. Either way, you're triple-checking every knot. You crack a joke about swimming to Oregon if the wagon sinks, but the young couple nearby just glares, their nerves as frayed as yours. When it's your turn, you guide the oxen into the water, the cold current tugging at their legs. You're wading alongside, water up to your knees, then your waist, shouting "Gee!" and "Haw!" like your life depends on it, because it might. The wagon lurches and your heart skips as a barrel shifts, but it holds. The far bank's close now, and you're coaxing the oxen with every ounce of willpower. Halfway across you spot a sodden quilt floating downstream, someone's keepsake lost to the river. It's a grim reminder of what's at stake. You're soaked, shivering and cursing the trail, but you make it, dragging your wagon onto dry ground with a squelch. The relief's short-lived. You're checking the wagon for damage, praying the flour stayed dry, when you hear a shout. Another wagon's stuck mid-river, its wheels caught on a rock. The group scrambles to help, tossing ropes and wading back in. It's chaos, but you're all in this together for now. By the time the wagon's freed, you're exhausted, your clothes clinging like a second skin. You crack another joke about starting a river taxi business, but the laughter's thin. Everyone's too cold to care. Night's falling as you set up camp, the river's roar a constant backdrop. You're drying out by a fire, but the damp's settled into your bones. Cooking's a slog, soggy bacon and lumpy biscuits, but you're grateful for anything warm. You're starting to understand why folks talk about the trail like it's a living beast, always ready to test you. The stars are out, but they feel distant, like they're watching you struggle and don't care. You're already dreading the next river and the one after that. As you crawl into your bedroll, the ground's as unforgiving as ever, but you're too tired to mind. Tomorrow's another day of plodding west, with the trail waiting to throw its next curve. You're trudging across the endless Nebraska plains, the Oregon Trail stretching before you like a dusty ribbon that never ends. The sun beats down, baking the earth into a cracked, unforgiving crust, and your boots kick up clouds of grit that coat your throat. The horizon's a flat, unchanging line, broken only by the swaying canvas of the wagon train ahead. Your oxen plod along, heads low as you walk beside them, coaxing with a weary haw when they veer off course. It's been weeks since independence, and the initial thrill of the journey has faded into a grinding monotony. Historically, the Great Plains were a psychological hurdle for pioneers. Hundreds of miles of sameness-tested resolve, as much as any river or mountain. You're feeling it now, each step blurring into the last. The plains are deceptively brutal. There's no shade, no landmarks, just grass and sky that seem to mock your progress. You're rationing water carefully. The streams are scarce, and the last one was brackish enough to make you wince. Your wagon's creaking under the strain, and you're eyeing the wheels, remembering that bear grease you didn't use back in Missouri. Maybe it wasn't such a bad idea. A quirky tidbit's been passed around the camp. Some pioneers swore by prairie coal, dried buffalo dung used as fuel when wood ran short. You're not desperate enough to try it yet, but the thought's lingering as your firewood dwindles. The monotony's wearing on everyone. The kids, once buzzing with energy, now drag their feet, whining about sore legs. The preacher's sermons are getting shorter, and even the young couple's arguments have dulled to sullen silence. You're all starting to doubt the dream of Oregon, though no one says it out loud. Historians still argue whether the plains broke more spirits than bodies. Starvation and disease were deadly, but boredom could sap the will to keep going. You're fighting it by counting steps or humming tunes, but your mind keeps wandering to what's ahead. Rivers, mountains, or worse. Wildlife's the only break in the routine. You spot antelope bounding in the distance too fast to hunt, and prairie dogs popping up like nosy neighbours. The oxen are spooked by every rustle, and you're gripping your rifle tighter, though you're no sharpshooter. You crack a joke about trading your wagon for a prairie dog's burrow. It's got to be cozier. But your wagon mate just grunts, too parched for humour. The real threat's not animals, but the land itself. Dust storms can whip up without warning, and you've already choked through one, shielding your face with a bandana that's more dirt than cloth now. You're also noticing the trail's litter. Broken axles, discarded trunks, even a cracked violin, its strings snapped like someone's dreams. Each abandoned item is a story of failure, and it's hard not to wonder if your wagon will join them. You're checking your supplies nightly, and the flour's dipping lower than you'd like. You're down to beans and bacon, with the occasional tough biscuit you bake over a feeble fire. You're starting to miss that soggy quilt you saw floating in the Kansas River. It'd be nice to have an extra layer tonight. Camp's a grim affair. You circle the wagons, more out of habit than fear, and huddle by a fire that's mostly sparks. The stars are stunning, but they're cold comfort when your stomach's growling and your feet throb. You're sharing a story about home to keep spirits up, but the widower's kid interrupts, asking if Oregon's really worth it. You don't have an answer. You crack another joke about selling the plains for $1 an acre, but it falls flat. As you settle into your bedroll, the ground's as hard as ever, and the wind carries a faint howl, coyote, or just your imagination. Sleep's a distant hope, but you close your eyes, praying tomorrow brings something, anything, to break the endless grind west. You're frozen in your tracks, heart pounding as the ground beneath you rumbles like a distant thunderstorm. A massive cloud of dust rises on the Nebraska plains, and you squint to make out the cause. A buffalo stampede. Thousands of shaky beasts thundering across the Oregon Trail. The air's thick with the scent of churned earth and animal musk, and your oxen bellow, tugging against their yokes. You're gripping the wagon, half mesmerized, half terrified, as the herd surges past, a living avalanche of muscle and hooves. Historically, buffalo herds numbering in the millions roamed the plains in the 1840s, and their stampedes could crush wagons or scatter livestock in seconds. You're praying your team holds steady, because losing an ox now could cripple your journey. The stampede's a spectacle, raw power you've never seen back east. You're shouting to your wagon mates to stay clear, while the kids gape, wide-eyed, from behind the wagons. The ground shakes so hard you feel it in your teeth, and dust coats your face, stinging your eyes. You're torn between awe and dread. One wrong move, and you're trampled. A quirky tidbit's been whispered around camp. Some pioneers collected buffalo hair to stuff pillows, claiming it was softer than straw. You're not about to chase a buffalo for a pillow, but you're half joking to your wagon mate about opening a trailside bedding shop. The look you get says they're not amused. The herd's moving away now, the rumble fading, but your pulse is still racing. You're checking the oxen, calming them with soft words, though your voice shakes. The wagon train's buzzing with relief and stories. Someone swears they saw a buffalo leap a creek in one bound. Historians still argue whether buffalo were more a resource or a hazard for pioneers. Hunting them provided meat, but stampedes like this could wipe out a season's progress. You're just glad your wagon's intact, though a loose rope needs tightening, and you're wiping sweat and dust from your brow. The stampedes left the trail a mess, churned to a sea of hoofprints and scattered dung. You're back to walking, the monotony of the plains creeping in again, but now with a new edge of caution. Every rustle in the grass makes you jump, wondering if another herd's coming. You're also low on water, and the next stream's a day away. The kids are whining again, spooked by the stampede, and you're trying to distract them with a story about buffalo racing the wind. It works, barely. The preacher's muttering about divine warnings, and you're starting to wonder if he's onto something. Hunting's the next big debate. Buffalo meat could stretch your supplies, but chasing a herd is risky, and you're no marksman. Some men in the train are itching to try, boasting about their rifles, but you're sceptical. They're more likely to shoot their own foot. You're sticking to your dwindling bacon for now, though it's starting to taste like regret. You crack another joke about buffalo hosting their own trail marathon, but the widower just grumbles his kid's too tired to laugh. The truth is, you're all fraying, the plains wearing you down like sandpaper. Camp tonight feels tense. You're circling the wagons tighter, spooked by the day's chaos. The fire's weak, fueled by that prairie coal you swore you'd never use. Buffalo dung's not as bad as you thought, but it's no cedar. You're chewing tough biscuits, dreaming of the fresh bread you left behind in Missouri. The stars are out, but they feel colder now, like they're watching you struggle. You're still shaken, replaying the stampede in your mind, wondering what else the trail's got in store. As you curl up in your bedroll, the ground's as hard as ever, and the distant howl of a coyote keeps sleep at bay. Tomorrow's another plod west, and you're bracing for whatever the plains throw next. You're trudging toward Fort Laramie, a speck of civilization on the Wyoming horizon, and the Oregon Trail's starting to feel like a cruel test of endurance. The plains have worn you thin, but the sight of the fort's adobe walls, squat and sturdy against the endless grass, sparks a flicker of hope. Your boots are caked with dust, and the oxen are plodding slower than ever, their ribs showing through matted hides. The air smells of sagebrush and distant wood smoke, a welcome change from the buffalo dung haze of the plains. Historically, Fort Laramie was a critical resupply point in the 1840s, a trading post where pioneers bartered for flour, bullets, or news of the trail ahead. You're praying it lives up to the hype, because your supplies are dwindling faster than your patience. The fort's a bustle of activity. Trappers, soldiers, and other wagon trains mix with native traders. Their voices a jumble of English, French, and languages you don't recognise. You're bartering for a sack of beans, parting with a spare blanket you can't afford to lose. Prices are steep, and the trader's smirk says he knows you're desperate. A quirky tidbits floating around. Some pioneers traded their wedding rings for a single ox, only to regret it when the animal dropped dead a week later. You're sticking to necessities, but you crack a joke about swapping your boots for a steak. Nobody laughs, probably because they're as hungry as you. You're also hearing rumours of what's ahead. Cholera outbreaks, mountain passes, and shortcuts that sound like traps. The fort's a gossip hub, and you're soaking it all in, trying to separate fact from fear. Historians still argue whether places like Fort Laramie were lifelines or profiteering scams. Some pioneers left with fresh hope, others with lighter wallets and heavier doubts. You're leaning toward the latter as you hand over coins for a sack of flour that's probably half sawdust. Still, the fort's a break from the trail's grind, and you're grateful for a night without circling the wagons. The wagon train's parked nearby, and you're helping repair a cracked axle, your hands blistered from the effort. The widower's kid is running around chasing a stray dog, and you're half tempted to join him just to feel something other than exhaustion. The preacher's holding court, preaching about perseverance, but you're more interested in the trapper swapping stories about grizzly bears in the Rockies. You're starting to notice cracks in the group. Some folks are talking about splitting off, lured by tales of faster routes. You're sticking with the main train, remembering those abandoned trunks you saw back on the plains. Loyalty's thin, but it's safer than going it alone. Food's still a grim routine. You're cooking over a borrowed fire, stirring beans that taste like despair. The fort's got fresh meat for sale, but it's priced like gold, so you're sticking to your rations. You crack another joke about opening a trailside diner with all-you-can-eat buffalo, but the young couple nearby just rolls their eyes. The truth is, you're all on edge, the fort's brief comfort overshadowed by the long road west. You're checking your oxen, praying they'll last and eyeing the mountains looming in the distance. They're beautiful but terrifying, like a promise you're not sure you can keep. As night falls, you're camped just outside the fort, the glow of lanterns casting shadows on the wagons. The air's cooler now, and you're wrapped in a threadbare blanket listening to the hum of voices and the occasional bark of a dog. The stars are out, but they feel less hostile here, maybe because you're not alone in the wilderness for once. You're thinking about that pine tar you didn't use at the Kansas River. Maybe it's time to waterproof the wagon before the next crossing. Sleep's calling, but your mind's racing with what-ifs. The trail's waiting and Fort Laramie's just a pause, not a finish line. You close your eyes, the ground as hard as ever, and hope tomorrow brings a little more strength. You're back on the Oregon Trail, the brief respite of Fort Laramie fading like a dream as the plains give way to rougher terrain. The air's sharper now, tinged with the bitter scent of sagebrush and the faint rot of something dead nearby. Your wagon creaks along, the oxen plodding slower each day, and your boots are wearing thin from endless walking. The trail's getting meaner, and so's the mood in the wagon train. But the real shadow looming over you isn't the mountains ahead. It's cholera, the invisible killer that's been whispered about since Missouri. Historically, cholera killed thousands on the trail in the 1840s, spread through bad water and poor sanitation, felling entire families in days. You're clutching your water barrel like it's a lifeline, praying it's clean. Every cough in the camp sets your nerves on edge. You're watching the widower's youngest kid, who's looking paler than usual, and the preacher's stopped sermonizing to tend to his wife, who's doubled over with cramps. Cholera's symptoms are brutal. Diarrhea, vomiting, and a dehydration so swift it can kill in hours. You're boiling every drop of water now, even if it slows you down, and you're avoiding streams unless they're crystal clear. A quirky tidbit's making the rounds. Some pioneers swore sugar and salt mixed in water could cure cholera, a desperate remedy that rarely worked. You're not buying it, but you crack a joke about starting a trailside pharmacy, hoping to lighten the mood. Nobody bites, fear's thicker than the dust. The wagon train's moving slower, partly because everyone's paranoid about pushing too hard. You're checking your supplies, noticing the flowers getting weevily, little black bugs squirming in the sacks. You're picking them out as best you can, but it's one more thing chipping away at your spirit. Historians still argue whether cholera's spread was worse due to ignorance or just the trail's harsh conditions. Crowded camps and tainted rivers didn't help. You're starting to see why folks left crosses by the trail, marking graves for those who didn't make it. You pass one now, a rough wooden marker with a name scratched into it, and you look away, not wanting to imagine your own. The group's fraying under the strain. The young couple's bickering has turned to cold silence, and someone's accusing the widower of hiding sick kids, which he denies with a clenched fist. You're trying to stay out of it, focusing on your oxen and the next mile. But you're also rationing food tighter, because Fort Laramie's prices cleaned you out. Dinner's a sad affair, beans, a scrap of bacon, and a biscuit hard enough to break a tooth. You're dreaming of the fresh apples you used to pick back east, but all you've got is dust and dread. You crack another joke about cholera being the trail's worst critic, but it lands flat, your wagon mate too busy scanning the horizon for trouble. Night camp's grim. You're circling the wagons, but the usual chatter's gone quiet, replaced by nervous glances and hushed prayers. The fire's low, fueled by sparse wood and that buffalo dung you're now using without complaint. You're on night watch again, your rifle heavy in your hands, listening for anything, coyotes, thieves, or just the wind carrying bad luck. The stars are out, but they feel mocking, like they know something you don't. You're thinking about that onion trick for mosquitoes back on the plains. Maybe it'd keep cholera away too, but you're too tired to try. Sleep's a distant hope, with every creak of the wagon making you jump. Tomorrow's another day of walking, watching, and praying you dodge the trail's deadliest shadow. You're clinging to the side of your wagon. The Oregon Trail now a brutal climb into the Rockies, where the air's thin and the paths a jagged scar through the mountains. The sweet sagebrush scent of the plains is gone, replaced by the sharp tang of pine and the metallic bite of cold rock. Your oxen are struggling, their breaths puffing white in the chilly dawn as they haul the wagon up slopes that feel like walls. Every step is a gamble. One loose stone could send a wheel spinning off or an ox tumbling into a ravine. Historically, the mountain passes like South Pass or the Blue Mountains were where many pioneers met their end, with accidents claiming more lives than disease in these stretches. You're praying your ropes hold and your luck doesn't run dry. The trail's turned into a rocky maze, forcing you to weave around boulders and skirt cliffs that drop into nothingness. You're walking ahead, testing the ground with a stick because one bad rut could snap an axle. Your hands are blistered from wrestling the oxen, and your boots are shredding on the sharp stones. A quirky tidbit's been shared by a grizzled scout. Some pioneers smeared axle grease on their feet to prevent blisters, claiming it worked better than socks. You're not that desperate yet, but you're eyeing your dwindling grease tin, wondering. You crack a joke about greasing your way to Oregon, but your wagon mate's too winded to laugh, their face etched with worry. The cold's a new enemy. Nights are freezing, and your blanket's too thin to keep the chill at bay. You're burning what little wood you can find, but fires are small and sputter out fast. The wagon train's tighter now, everyone huddling closer, but tempers are short. The widower's kid slipped on a rock yesterday, spraining an ankle, and the preacher's preaching less, coughing more. Historians still argue whether the mountains were the trail's true crucible. Some say they tested grit, others say they broke it. You're feeling both. Your resolve fraying as you watch an ox stumble, its hoof catching a root. You're quick to steady it, but your heart's in your throat. The view's stunning, snow-capped peaks and valleys that stretch forever. But beauty's a cold comfort when you're starving for air and progress. You're rationing food harder now, down to a handful of beans and a scrap of bacon daily. The kids are whining, their faces gaunt, and you're telling stories of Oregon's green fields to keep them moving. You pass a wrecked wagon, its canvas torn and wheels shattered, a grim reminder of what's at stake. You're checking your own wagon obsessively, tightening bolts and praying the canvas holds against the wind. You crack another joke about trading the mountains for a flat road back east, but the young couple nearby just glares, their own wagon creaking ominously. Camp's a bleak affair, tucked into a narrow gully to shield from the wind. The fire's barely alive, and you're chewing a biscuit that's more grit than grain. The stars are sharp up here, like pinpricks in a black curtain, but they don't ease the knot in your chest. You're thinking about that pine tar you didn't use at the Kansas River. Maybe it'd help seal a leaking seam now. Night watch is brutal, the cold biting through your coat as you scan the darkness for bears or worse. The trail's teaching you that every mile is a fight, and the mountains don't care if you're tired. As you crawl into your bedroll, the rocky ground digs into your back, and sleeps a faint hope. Tomorrow's another climb, and you're bracing for the trail's next test. You're staggering along the Oregon Trail high in the Rockies, where the air's so thin it feels like you're breathing through a straw. The scent of pine lingers, but it's undercut by the sour tang of your own sweat, and the oxen's laboured panting. Your wagon's creaking louder than ever, each jolt over the rocky path a reminder that you're one broken wheel from disaster. Food's running dangerously low, your flour's nearly gone, and the bacon's down to scraps that barely qualify as a meal. Hunger's a constant gnaw now, not just in your stomach, but in the gaunt faces of the wagon train. Historically, starvation was a silent killer on the trail, claiming lives when supplies ran out and game was scarce. You're praying for a deer or even a rabbit, but the mountains aren't generous. You're rationing every bite, doling out half portions to the kids, who've stopped whining and started staring blankly at the horizon. You're trying to keep their spirits up with tales of Oregon's orchards, but your own voice sounds hollow. A quirky tidbit's been whispered around camp. Some pioneers boiled their leather boots for soup when food ran out, claiming it was better than nothing. You're not there yet, but you're eyeing your worn-out boots, wondering how desperate you'll get. You crack a joke about opening a trailside soup kitchen with leather bisque, but the widower just grunts, too hungry to care. Hunting's your only hope, but it's a gamble. The men are talking about tracking elk, but you're no sharpshooter, and ammo's low. You're remembering that buffalo stampede back on the plains. Meat was plentiful then, but now you're lucky to spot a squirrel. Historians still argue whether starvation was worse in the mountains or the plains. Game was scarcer here, but the plains' monotony broke the will to hunt. You're feeling it now, each step heavier, your body burning energy you can't replace. The preacher's stopped sermonizing entirely, his cough worse, and the young couple's bickering has turned to whispered panic about their own supplies. The trail's relentless, winding through passes where loose rocks slide underfoot. You're guiding the oxen with a trembling hand, coaxing them over slopes that make your heart lurch. You pass a discarded trunk, its contents spilled. Letters, a broken clock, someone's dreams left to rot. It's a gut punch, reminding you of that soggy quilt from the Kansas River, another life's fragment lost. You're checking your wagon obsessively, tightening ropes and praying the axles hold. The kids are too weak to wander now, sticking close, and you're carrying the youngest on your shoulders when you can, though it's killing your back. Camp's a grim ritual. You're scraping together a fire from twigs and pine cones, the flames too weak to warm your hands. Dinner's a handful of beans and a sliver of weevilly flour paste you call a biscuit. You're dreaming of that fresh bread you left in Missouri, but it's a distant memory. You crack another joke about trading the mountains for a single apple, but it falls flat. The group too hollow-eyed to laugh. The stars are out, sharp and cold, and you're wondering if Oregon's worth this slow starvation. Night watch is torture, your stomach growling louder than the wind. You're clutching your rifle, not for danger but for balance, as you scan the dark for anything edible. Sleep's a faint hope, the rocky ground digging into your bones. You're thinking about that bear grease you didn't use on the plains. Maybe it'd make the boots taste better if it comes to that. The trail's teaching you hunger's a crueler foe than rivers or stampedes, and you're fighting to believe there's a green valley waiting. Tomorrow's another hungry march, and you're bracing for the trail to test you further. You're plodding along the Oregon Trail, the Rockies' jagged peaks looming behind you as the trail dips into a scrubby valley. The air carries the sharp scent of dust and sage, but there's a new tension today. Hoof prints and signs of campfires that aren't yours. You're approaching lands where native tribes, like the Shoshone or Cheyenne, roam, and your wagon train's buzzing with nervous whispers. Your oxen plod slower, as if they sense the unease, and your hands never far from the rifle slung over your shoulder. Historically, encounters with Native Americans on the trail were a mixed bag. Some tribes traded food or guided pioneers, while others clashed over stolen game or trespassing. You're hoping for the former, but braced for anything. You spot them first. A small group of riders on the horizon, their silhouettes stark against the setting sun. The wagon train halts, and you're gripping the reins, heart thumping. The preacher's muttering prayers, and the widower's pulling his kids close. You're part of the group sent to parley, stepping forward with a trader who claims to know a few words of Shoshone. You're carrying a sack of flour as a peace offering, though it's half of what you can spare. A quirky tidbit's been shared around camp. Some tribes took to trail cast-offs, turning discarded kettles into tools or jewellery. You're wishing you'd kept that chipped teapot from Missouri. Might have been a good trade. The meeting's tense but civil. The riders, faces painted with ochre, eye your group warily, but accept the flour, offering dried meat in return. You're struck by their skill with horses, moving like they're part of the animals. The trader's fumbling translation leads to a misunderstanding about water rights, but it's smoothed over with gestures and more flour. Historians still argue whether most native encounters were peaceful or perilous. Records show trade was common, but fear often skewed pioneer stories. You're just relieved when the riders move on, leaving you with meat that tastes like salvation after weeks of beans. Back on the trail, the encounters got everyone rattled. The young couple's whispering about savages, and you're biting your tongue, knowing the meat in your pack came from those savages. You're trying to focus on the path, guiding the oxen around rocks, but the group's paranoia is contagious. You're noticing every snapped twig now, wondering if it's a deer or something worse. The kids are quieter, clinging to the wagon, and you're telling them stories of friendly traders to ease their fears. You crack a joke about starting a trailside trading post, but it's met with nervous glances. Nobody's in the mood. Camp's uneasy tonight, the wagon circled tighter than ever. You're chewing the gifted meat, tough but rich, and it's a reminder of how fragile your supplies are. The fire's low, built from sparse brush, and you're saving the last of your buffalo dung for leaner days. You're thinking about that pine tar from the Kansas River. Maybe it'd make a signal fire if trouble comes. Night watch feels heavier, your eyes scanning the dark for movement. The stars are out, but they're no comfort. They're light too cold to ease the knot in your chest. You crack another joke about trading your boots for a horse, but the widower just shakes his head, too spooked to laugh. As you settle into your bedroll, the ground's as hard as the mountains, and sleep's a distant hope. The trail's teaching you that trust is as scarce as food, and you're wondering if Oregon's worth these uneasy alliances. Tomorrow's another march, with eyes on the horizon for friends or foes. You're trudging along the Oregon Trail, the Wyoming dust coating your boots as the wagon train snakes through a rocky valley. The air's heavy with the scent of sweat and sagebrush, and the oxen's slow plodding is a rhythm you've come to hate. The group's fraying at the edges, weeks of hunger and hardship turning neighbours into strangers. What started as a tight-knit band back in Missouri is now a powder keg of squabbles and suspicions. Historically, wagon trains often splintered under stress. By the 1840s, nearly a third dissolved before reaching Oregon, torn apart by distrust or bad decisions. You're feeling the cracks now, each argument a reminder that survival depends on cooperation, whether you like these folks or not. The latest fight's over water. A muddy stream yesterday was barely enough for the oxen, and someone, nobody's fessing up, took an extra share from the communal barrel. The widower's pointing fingers at the young couple, who snap back that his kids are the ones wasting it. You're trying to stay neutral, but it's hard when you're rationing sips yourself. A quirky tidbit's been grumbled around camp. Some pioneers settle disputes with trail courts, makeshift trials where votes decided who got kicked out. You're hoping it doesn't come to that, but you crack a joke about holding a trial for the oxen. They're drinking more than anyone. The preacher glares, his cough worse, and nobody laughs. The tension's not just about water. The trail's relentless grind, rock-snapping axles, dust-choking lungs, has everyone on edge. Last night, someone's wagon got stuck and half the group refused to help, claiming they're saving their strength. You pitched in, hauling ropes until your hands bled, but the resentment's lingering. Historians still argue whether wagon train breakdowns were due to human nature or the trail's brutal conditions. Selfishness thrived when survival was at stake. You're seeing it firsthand, watching alliances shift like sand. The young couple's talking about breaking off, lured by rumours of a shortcut, and you're tempted to let them go, remembering those wrecked wagons back in the mountains. You're focused on keeping your own wagon rolling, checking the wheels for cracks and coaxing the oxen with a weary "Gee!" The kids are quieter now, their energy sapped by hunger, and you're spinning tales of Oregon's rivers to keep them moving. But the group's discord is a heavier burden than the rocky trail. The preacher's stopped preaching, too weak to stand, and the widower's kid keeps wandering off, ignoring warnings. You're starting to feel like you're herding people as much as oxen, and it's exhausting. You crack another joke about charging for trail mediation services, but it falls flat, the group too fractured for humour. Camp's a tense affair, the wagons circled more out of habit than trust. The fire's weak, built from sparse twigs, and you're chewing a scrap of dried meat from that native trade a few days back. It's tough, but it's better than the weevily flour you're down to. You're thinking about that portable soup you heard about in Independence. Maybe it wasn't such a bad idea. Night watch is grim, your eyes scanning for trouble, human or otherwise. The stars are out, cold and distant, and you're wondering if the group can hold together long enough to reach Oregon. Sleep's a faint hope, the ground digging into your back like a grudge. Tomorrow's another march, and you're bracing for more fights, on the trail or in the camp. You're pushing through the final stretch of the Oregon Trail, the Blue Mountains behind you, and the promise of Oregon's Willamette Valley tantalizingly close. The air's fresher now, laced with the scent of damp earth and cedar, but your body's running on fumes. Your oxen are skeletal, their steps faltering, and your wagon's a battered shell, held together by frayed ropes and sheer stubbornness. Every mile feels like a personal victory, but the trail's not done testing you. Historically, this last leg was where many pioneers faltered. Exhaustion, hunger, and late-season snows could turn hope into despair just short of the goal. You're gripping the reins, coaxing your team forward, praying you've got enough left to make it. The path's a muddy slog carved by countless wagons before you, and your boots sink with every step. You're rationing the last of your beans. The kids' faces gaunt as they chew on biscuits harder than rocks. You're telling them stories of Oregon's green fields, but your voice cracks, worn thin by weeks of dust and doubt. A quirky tidbit's been shared around the dwindling camp. Some pioneers, too weak to walk, tied themselves to their wagons to keep from falling behind. You're not there yet, but you're eyeing your ropes, wondering. You crack a joke about hitching yourself to the oxen for a free ride, but the widower's kid, trailing behind, just stares. too tired for smiles. The wagon train's a shadow of its former self. Splits and sickness have whittled it down, and the young couple's gone, off on that shortcut you warned against. You're hoping they're okay, but the trail's littered with reminders of bad bets. Broken wheels, a lone shoe, a faded letter half buried in mud. Historians still argue whether the final push was more mental or physical. Exhaustion could break spirits as easily as bodies. You're feeling both, each step a battle against the urge to lie down and give up. The preacher's barely walking, propped up by his wife, and the widower's kid clings to you now, his father too weak to argue. The landscape's changing, softening into rolling hills, but the trail's still cruel. A sudden rain turns the path to sludge, and you're wrestling the wagon free from ruts, your hands raw and your back screaming. You're thinking about that bear grease from the plains. Maybe it'd ease the wheels now, but it's long gone. You're also low on water, the last stream too muddy to trust after that cholera scare. You're boiling every drop, remembering the graves you passed, each one a warning. You crack another joke about selling the mud as Oregon's finest soup, but it's met with silence. The group's too drained for humour. Camp's a fragile ritual, the few remaining wagons circled under a grey sky. The fire's pathetic, fueled by damp twigs, and you're choking down a paste of weevilly flour and water. The stars are hidden by clouds, and the night feels heavier, like the trail's holding its breath. You're on watch, your rifle a cold weight, scanning for wolves or worse, though the real threat's the exhaustion creeping into your bones. You're replaying that native trade, grateful for the meat that's long gone, and wondering if Oregon's as green as they say. Sleep's a distant hope, the ground soggy and unforgiving. Tomorrow's the final push, and you're clinging to the dream of a valley that's worth all this. You're stumbling into Oregon's Willamette Valley, the Oregon Trail's end, where the air smells of damp grass and blooming wildflowers, a stark contrast to the dust and despair of the past months. Your wagon's a battered ghost, its canvas torn, wheels wobbling like they're ready to quit. The oxen are barely moving, their ribs sharp under dull hides, and you're not much better, gaunt, blistered, and leaning on a stick for support. The valley's green slopes stretch before you, a promise kept, but the joy's tempered by what you've lost. Historically, only about half of the 400,000 pioneers who started the trail in the 1840s made it to Oregon, the rest stopped by death, desertion, or defeat. You're here, but the cost feels heavier than the wagon you've dragged 2,000 miles. The trail's final miles were a blur of mud and hope. You passed the Dalles, where some floated their wagons down the Columbia River, but you stuck to the land, too stubborn, or too broke, for a raft. Now, standing on a rise overlooking the valley, you see homesteads dotting the landscape, smoke curling from chimneys. It's real, but it feels unreal, like a painting you can't touch. A quirky tidbit's been shared by a fellow survivor. Some pioneers upon arriving kissed the ground, only to spit out dirt and laugh. You're tempted to try it, but you crack a joke about planting your boots instead. They've earned a rest. The widower's kid clinging to your side manages a weak smile. The wagon train's a skeleton now, just a handful of wagons left. The preacher's gone, buried somewhere in the Blue Mountains, and the young couple's fate is unknown, lost to that shortcut. You're helping the widower stake a claim, marking out 640 acres of promised land. But the paperwork feels like a cruel formality after all you've endured. Historians still argue whether Oregon's promise was worth the trail's toll. Free land was a dream, but building a life here meant starting from nothing. You're feeling it now, staring at a plot of earth that's yours but demands everything you've got left. You're unloading the wagon, each item a memory of the journey. The flowers gone, the bacon a distant dream, but you've still got that letter from your sister, creased and faded but intact. You're thinking about that soggy quilt from the Kansas River, the buffalo stampede, the native trade, each moment a scar on your soul. The kids are running, finally free, chasing each other through the grass, and you're letting them, too tired to call them back. You crack another joke about opening a trail museum with all your broken gear, but it's bittersweet. Nobody's left to laugh with you. Camp's different tonight. Not a circle of wagons, but a makeshift home under a willow tree. The fire's small, fueled by real wood for once, and you're eating a potato gifted by a settler. The first fresh food in months. It tastes like heaven, but you're chewing slowly, savouring every bite. The stars are out, softer now, like they're welcoming you instead of watching you struggle. You're reflecting on the trail, its lessons carved into you, grit, loss, and the fragile hope that carried you here. As you settle onto the soft grass, the valley's quiet wraps around you like a blanket. The fire's embers glow, casting gentle shadows that dance across the earth, and the distant hoot of an owl feels like a lullaby. You're safe now, the trail's dangers fading into memory like a storm that's passed. Your body's heavy, but it's a good weight, grounded in this new place you'll call home. The kids are asleep nearby, their breaths slow and even, dreaming of fields they'll soon explore. You're thinking of that letter, tucked safely away, and the promise of writing back, telling your sister you made it. The stars above are a familiar canopy, but they seem kinder here. They're like a soft whisper of rest. You're letting go of the trail's ghosts, rivers, hunger, graves, each one slipping away as your eyes grow heavy. The ground's no longer a foe, cradling you like an old friend. You're imagining the house you'll build, the crops you'll plant, the life you'll carve from this valley. It's not easy, but it's yours, earned with every aching step. The wind's a gentle hum, carrying the scent of cedar and tomorrow's hope. You're drifting now, the world softening, edges blurring into a warm haze. Sleep's calling, not as a fleeting hope, but a gift, ready to take you. Let the valley hold you, let the stars watch over, and let the trail's weight dissolve into dreams. You're here, and that's enough. Rest now, pioneer, in the quiet of a new beginning.